As I said, Prop 128 is opposed by both Lutheran Advocacy as well as Together Colorado. The general gist of this one is that it would lengthen the amount of time a person has to serve in prison before they would become eligible for parole. Now, right now, the statute, as far as I'm aware, and this is for a certain class of violent crimes, I believe the statutes right now say 75%. And that is what's on the books, but there are also, as you probably know, a lot of ways in which people who are incarcerated can mitigate the time that they serve through good behavior and other incentive programs. There's different programs inside the system that allow people to reduce the sentence they serve. I believe the group that is promoting this measure claims that people in this category serve an average of about 50% of their sentence. As far as I know, that's relatively accurate. But it's just to say that, there's a difference between what's on the statute and what's served on average because of those incentives. Well, this would not only extend that to 85% of a sentence having to be served, but it would also take away those incentives for good behavior, things that can mitigate the length of somebody's sentence. We are opposed to this for a variety of reasons, and I think I summarized a little bit there that we don't really see the public safety benefit. It would be more expensive, as far as we can tell, to keep more people in prison. And we also think this conflicts with our vision as a church of the criminal justice system as being, in part, rehabilitative and not purely punitive. So that the idea would be taking away incentives for good behavior and educational programs and all those kind of things is really at odds with a vision of a rehabilitative system. So that's the brief summary. Would you like to say anything about Together Colorado's opinion as well?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add on that is we had our presentation from the Center for Financial, the nonpartisan that raised these bills based on money, and their analysis. What is it? Colorado Fiscal Institute. And it was CFI. I don't remember all the names.
Yeah.
Anyways, they came out and they're anticipating that it's going to cost our taxpayers between $12 and $48 million, plus the additional cost of raising capital to build additional prison space. And generally, the people that are being paroled in this are considered no longer threats to society because they're older and they're not going to go out and redo the crimes. And then the last thing is, by extending these prison sentences to 85%, the prison population will continue to age. That means the cost of incarceration will continue to go up due to all of the age-related attributes of what a incarcerated person is able to do. So we are completely in line with.
Great. Yeah, Betty.
Isn't this there because Colorado did away with the death penalty? I think that was the ultimate cause for
I think that's true
for murder one being an issue, because it's basically murder one. That's the issue here.
Yeah, I know that's true for Amendment I. I guess I don't know what the intersection might be with this one, but it's part of. I think that's a good point. It's part of downstream effects. Sometimes we advocate for things and we're not always completely sure how it will interact with all of our statutes, because there's a lot of statutes out there. And so this is part of making sure that we're following up with the work that we do in past years and making sure it's consistent with the continuing vision we have for the kind of state we want to live in. So that's 128. I'm happy. I wonder, I'll just pause there and actually ask if you have any questions about this one or comments. And if you have them later, if something occurs to you, you can always raise it later. Seeing none, I think I'll jump to the next one, which is Prop JJ. It's kind of a minor one, but we decided to support this because this is about retaining revenue that the state has collected from sports betting. This is revenue the state has already collected under the sports betting law that was passed a few years ago. And it's not because we have a position about sports betting, although if anything, it's probably negative. This is because the state has already collected this revenue, and the dedicated fund where this revenue goes is for the State Water Conservation Fund. And so this is really actually for us an environmental measure as much as it is a fiscal measure, dedicating that money to state water conservation projects. If the voters do not pass this, again, this is on the ballot because of Tabor, because the revenue we collected was higher than the estimate for sports betting revenue for the tax that we levied. If the voters don't pass this, the money will be refunded to the people who paid it, which are casino operators. So for us, it felt, again, whatever you think about casino operators, we think the money is better in the hands of our water conservation fund than being refunded. And I think that's basically, like I say, an environmental measure for us rather than a gambling one. I'm going to jump ahead maybe to I and J, and then I'll pause after we talk about those two, see if there's any questions or comments. Amendment I is also a criminal justice measure, and this is one which, as the senator noted, is downstream of our repeal of the death penalty. Lutheran Advocacy was one of many groups, faith groups and otherwise, and this included Together Colorado as well, that was a part of the effort to finally repeal the death penalty in Colorado in 2020. That bill passed in the first 2 weeks of March 2020, so we just got it right in under the wire before everything shut down. But that was the culmination of over a decade of work of many groups, like I say, that did this. What we did not realize, and what the legislature has now come to realize as well, is that by removing the class of offenses that are called capital offenses, which are the small class of offenses that qualified for the death penalty, primarily basically first-degree murder, that we were also removing that category of offenses from our statutory bail exemption law. Now, in Colorado, offenders have to be offered bail to potentially not have to be incarcerated while they're awaiting trial. There was an exemption for first-degree murder offenses where there was a high degree of presumption. If there's any lawyers, judges in the room, I apologize. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know exactly how to define a high degree of presumption, but it's something that judges have discretion over, determining basically if there's a high likelihood that the person, the offender, would be convicted at trial. In that case, in that small, thankfully small category of offenders, because we repealed the death penalty, we were no longer able to exempt those crimes from bail. Judges were having to offer absurd amounts of, I think there was a case where they offered $100 million as bail, which, that's absurd. So we think, as an appropriate expression of care and concern for the community, especially for the families of homicide victims, that it's appropriate to have, again, a very limited small group of offenses where bail is not required to be offered, and that persons will await trial while incarcerated. The last one, Amendment J, removes the ban on same-sex marriage in Colorado state constitution. This was put into the Constitution in 2006 by the voters. In Article 2, Section 31, it defines marriages between one man and one woman. That became the law in Colorado changed de facto in 2014. You may remember Obergefell v. Hodges at the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage in every state, regardless of what was on the books at the time. This is basically just removing that now outmoded language from our state constitution, and matching where the legal regime is now. And as I note here, our social statement on human sexuality talks about marriage as the highest context for trust and mutuality in human relationships. And there are many thousands of same-sex couples in Colorado who are primarily the drivers behind this move to remove our old ban from the books. So I'm going to pause there. Those are, again, the four measures we have a considered position on. Are there any questions, comments, wonderings, opinions about any of those? Oh, Morgan, yes.
The amendment for same-sex marriage, would it also, theoretically be possible, since same-sex marriage was legalized by a court case, would it also be the case that if, the Supreme Court went back, or there was another court case that rolled that back, that then Colorado would then, you know what I mean? Is there an argument that's? I
think I understand what you mean. And that really is the main argument the proponents of this measure are making, is a concern that, shifting winds at the federal level, Supreme Court jurisprudence can change, that in the case that might happen, the proponents wanted to remove that old language from the books, just to ensure there's no conflict between what the legislature might want to do statutorily and what we have written in the Constitution. And again, because it's constitutional, we as the voters are the only ones who can remove that from the Constitution. So yes, a very salient point. And I believe I should clarify as well, Senator, correct me if I'm wrong. So for measures, any of these that are amendments to the Constitution, it's worth noting that in order to pass these, you have to have 55% of the vote. It's not just a simple majority. All the propositions on the top require just 50% plus one. And if it's amendment to the Constitution, we made that change, I think 8 years ago now, where we made it harder to amend the Constitution. So there's a higher bar. The only exception, I think, and this is where I wonder if Betty can correct me, I think if we're just deleting language, it's still just a simple majority. I can't remember exactly though. Yeah. If you're changing the language at all, any new language going in, you have to have 55. But if you're just deleting, which is what this one does, you just need a majority. So this one only requires a simple majority.
It's based on how many votes were required.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. That's helpful too, based on the votes to put it in. And again, that was a change we made, I think 8 years ago-ish, to make it harder to amend. I think it was called raise the bar. And so there's, again, pluses and minuses to all that. Well, seeing none, if there's, again, questions, jump in later. Oh, Joanne, of course.
I have a question on Amendment 79.
Oh, we'll get into that if I may pause us there. Yeah, we'll get to all the rest. I just want to know if there's any questions about any of the four that I just talked about. But yes, definitely want to get into Amendment 79. Great. Okay. Well, let's jump ahead and actually, Katie, if I can see here.
Into the four.
Yeah, I wonder, do we want to move to those three now?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So we're going to move to the next three that we'll talk about are on the Together Colorado sheet. Hopefully you all have that. And again, I should be clear, I'm not speaking for Together Colorado, and Katie can do that if need be, but I'm happy to talk about what these are, and then we can get into some of the arguments that are being made. If that makes sense.
There's some right
Ooh,
up here. Yeah.
Yes, right here. We've got extras if you don't have one.
I could go make copies of
Yes,
this.
there's a whole pile.
The three that we just talked about.
Right.
Together already.
Peter and I just talked, nothing that we are Together Colorado is saying to vote. All ours are a no vote, and they are all.
And we're neutral.
They're
So
neutral,
we don't
but they're not-
conflict.
They're not in conflict with Rocky Mountain.
Yeah.
Right, what I was talking about was the last one, JJIJ.
Oh yeah, I don't think Together Colorado has a position on any of those.
Yeah, we did not take some positions.
Yeah.
So.
A good question.
Good,
Though,
thanks,
yeah.
Beth. Yeah.
Let's go first to amendment. Let's go to, let's talk about Amendment 80 first. Amendment 80 is called Constitutional Right to School Choice. And so this, again, is adding language to the state constitution, would require 55% plus one to pass. The language that it adds to the Constitution, it's sort of broad language about what constitutes school choice, and saying that that we recognize a right to a quality education. That term is not defined in the statute, but it would add that language to the Constitution. In the measure, the way it defines school choice is this whole variety of schooling, public, private, charter, homeschooling, et cetera. The opponents, and I'll hand it over to Katie because I know Together Colorado has taken a no position on this. We're neutral on this. And I should say neutral doesn't mean we have no opinion about it, but it just means we don't have enough specific language in our documents to take a specific position on it. Our tech guru is making sure we're going to be well in line. So anyway, I think the main opposing argument, which I did include there because that was part of our discussion, was that people argue it's a precursor to implementing something like a voucher system. And if you're not familiar with what that is, the general gist is just that it means a voucher for a student who would attend a private school or something that's not a public school and would divert some of that public money towards a private school. Now, I should be clear, this amendment does not do that. It does not create a voucher system, but there is an argument that it sort of might lead the way to something like that. So that's an important distinction. I'm going to let Katie talk more about it.
Said
Yeah,
I have to stand up here.
sure.
Okay.
So you're on camera.
So in the investigation we did at Together Colorado over this Amendment 80, what Peter said was exactly right. It doesn't create the money, but that just, you take that one step further. The money to fund it would actually be coming from the state budget. So it would basically be pulling funding from public education. And this is really put out there by an organization called Advancing Colorado, which is very deep pockets, very dark money of who's really behind it. And they're behind a few more of these that were voted no, that Together Colorado is recommending no on. And what this would also do is probably set up very, very lengthy court battles, because within the statutes of our state now, we currently have school choice between public schools and charter schools, which are all overseen by the public education. So there's standards and certain measures that they have to meet. So this would erase that. And when we had some training on it, one of the proponents had said, well, I'm homeschooling my kids. I should get money. I want to do a public PE trip. I'm going to take my kids skiing in Breckenridge for a week because that's their PE for the semester. These vouchers could go that far to cover that. So this is really the dismantling of first steps of this out of state dark money coming in to try to chip away at dismantling public education.
The other thing
Thank
they
you.
said was 5% of the children in Colorado go to private or other schools. The other
90.
number of people are in the public schools, and we'll be taking money away from most of the kids
Hmm.
and giving that to smaller numbers of kids. So it's a small group.
Oh,
I think that's right.
I think you're right. And I guess one of the other facts that I was completely blown away when we were actually digging into this. I consider Colorado a very affluent state. We are number 47th in the country of per pupil funding of public education. Let that sink in. Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, Pastor Karen.
I don't know the term dark money.
Oh,
Oh,
Oh.
you want to talk about what you mean by that?
Okay.
Yeah.
okay, sorry. So the dark money is if you think about these, like campaign finance, where now we allow lots of money to come into these various initiatives or whatever, you can't trace who's actually providing the funding to Advance Colorado to say who is actually funding it. Because to me, if you can go back and see who's putting in their dollars, what are they making, what are the ulterior motives, or really what they're going at. And there is some indication, and we haven't been able to prove it, but there is pretty good indication. Elon Musk has been behind this one pretty big. So, I mean, that was pretty shocking when I heard that was because of Colorado for sure. So is that a good way to explain dark?
I think that's fair. Yeah. Go ahead.
I-
Well, one
I
of them is
don't know
dead,
that.
so I
I
can't
don't
speak to
know.
the other one. I'm not sure. I mean, the answer, I mean, Katie's correct to put it this way. It's basically that you have certain kinds of political action committees that don't have to report who their donors are. And so if large amounts of money are supporting a given initiative, you don't necessarily know where that money is coming from. So that's means there's like a veil of ignorance that we are behind. So thank you for expressing that, Katie. That is, again, that's Together Colorado has taken that position on Amendment 80. I think very fair things to consider. I want to jump to the next two props, and then we'll pause again if we have more questions about these. So these are, let's see, Prop 130 and 131. Let's start with 130. This is, again, sort of criminal justice adjacent. It's about law enforcement funding. Would create a new fund called the Peace Officer Training and Support Fund. It would require the legislature to appropriate $350 million to put into that fund. The important caveat there is that it does not create a new source of revenue for that fund. So the legislature would have to appropriate it by finding it somewhere else. And weirdly enough, the legislature does not have $350 million just lying around, even though, some people might think so. So this would be, again, as I say in the analysis here, specifically about law enforcement agency grants that are about hiring, merit bonuses, continuing ed. It talks in the measure about specific kinds of crime that they want the funding to address gang activity, drug trafficking. I think is important to mention because this was part of our analysis and discussion as well with our committee. Does not include any money for diversion or mental health programs, things that we would consider maybe the root causes of crime. Katie, would you like to speak more
Sure.
to the
I
no
got you.
position from Together
Okay.
Colorado?
All right. So on this one for 130, this $350 million, like Peter said, there's no identified revenue. So think in the state budget today, we would have to cut it. The state budget today includes a $30 million grant. There's money sitting there for smaller law enforcement organizations to come in and get grants if they're not well funded. But generally, law enforcement is funded at the local level. So this is really stepping up. And if you read even a bit further in this proposition, it establishes a fund to provide, and this is the one that made people on heartstrings. It establishes $1 million to go to families of fallen law enforcement. They already get money from the state. It doesn't, we've already given them money. So it doesn't necessarily have to do that. So it's really, our Together Colorado is it. Oh, and then also another fun fact that in the state of Colorado right now, per citizen, $418 a year per person already funds law enforcement. It is one of the best well-funded programs within our state on the local level. So correct. And we'll talk about that with Denver because we have something to solve that one. So yeah, you're right. There's more officers, but necessarily not the funding of it. So it's the one taking money from the general budget, not sure where it would come from. And two, there's already funding going for it, local and the state already supports it on another way. Yeah. Any questions on that? Okay.
It's great. Thanks, Katie. The only other two things that I want to say about that is, yeah, you're correct to point out some of the money in this is dedicated to, I think they call it a fallen officers fund. But it's important to remember that we do already have state funding that does go to that. This would add to what already exists. And the other thing to say that I found interesting is that there actually is not any time requirement in this. So if it were passed, theoretically, the legislature can decide when they want to implement it. They don't have a deadline in the statute somehow. So they could just choose to kick the can down the road for a while if they wanted to. It's not really probably what the proponents intended when they wrote it, but they did not include that. So important things to consider with Prop 130. I'm going to talk about 131 briefly, and then we'll pause and we'll ask for questions and opinions and hot takes, all of these things. Pastor Karen, I saw on your face, maybe, okay. Well, let's go to 131. This you've probably heard about in the news. Certainly you've probably heard the term ranked choice voting. This measure does two different things, and they are different, and it's important to specify what they are. Yeah. The first is to establish what's called an all-candidate primary and a top four open primary. What that means is that all the candidates running for a given office, let's say, state Senate District 23. I don't remember what your district was. Anyway, great. All right. Let's say you're running in state Senate District 23, just for example. All the candidates, regardless of what party they are affiliated with or if they're unaffiliated, would all go into an open primary. You as a voter would get a ballot. All the voters would get a ballot. It would not just be a party primary. You would get to vote on whoever you want to vote for. The top four candidates, top four vote getters, would then go to the general election in the fall. So that's the top four system, which is, as you can probably tell, very different from what we have now. Right now, we have a semi-open primary system. If you're an independent voter, you get the two party ballots. You can choose one. If you're registered with a party, you get that ballot. So that would change that side of the election. And then in the general election, this measure would also create what is called, people call it ranked choice voting. I think more formally, it's known as instant runoff voting, where you take those four candidates, you rank them in the order that you prefer them, and then the winner of the election is tabulated based on a complicated math formula that if you want me to, we can get into the math if you really want to, but this is basically a system that eliminates the least popular candidate if there's not a majority vote getter, and then redistributes those votes to their next top choice. and then until you get to a majority, and that's how you determine who the winner is. There's a few states that use this already, Alaska, Hawaii, Maine, all of our weird states, they use it. Well, so Alaska, there's a measure to repeal it on the ballot. They approved it 2 years ago, and now there's a measure to repeal it. So that's worth noting, because there are some places that have been using it, and then now there's kind of a counter movement as well. That's all I'll say about it, because I think I've got the facts correct, but I know that Together Colorado does have a position on
We
this.
did take a
So
vote
go
on
ahead.
this one. Okay. So once again, are you getting this theme about the dark money coming in? We already, as Peter said, we already have a semi-open. You can vote either Democratic, Republican, or if you're, that's what you get, right? So you can go register independent and do that. What this then would allow is a lot of dark money coming in to get those top 4 people on a ballot. And that, once again, that was the analysis that's coming in. The other flip side of that, it would require all of our election processes to be redone and the voting machines to be redone. And Colorado Fiscal Institute said they were unable to calculate the money because it's so out there of what it would cost us as a state to administer elections under this type of voting. So because the potential for a lot of dark money coming in to influence that open primary, and the cost of redoing all of our voting machines, as Peter said, it's very complicated, of the mathematics behind it, that they voted no, because it's a lot of money that's going to be spent on elections. And right now, I think Colorado says that we have one of the most secure elections in the country, that we really have no issues with it. And currently, in today's environment, we also have a state that has one of the highest participatory voter records. So what problem is this really trying to solve?
But we have
Thanks, Katie.
Lots. Election 1, election 2, election 3, the board, it's gonna cost a lot more money, because you actually have to have several elections that come up with the final verdict.
Well, you theoretically, the votes are tabulated instantly. So they are able to, in the general election, you won't have to vote multiple times. You'll just be able to rank them all and vote in whatever order, and they'll tabulate them right away. But to your point about money, your vote would be reallocated to whoever your next choice is. Yeah. So if you didn't rank another one, though, you're out of luck. So that's a fair question to raise, because it is kind of not intuitive really for the American electorate. It's not really as widespread as it might be for the proponents. To your point about money, though, I think it's worth noting that one of the distinctions between our current system and this one would be, you could theoretically be in a district where the top 4 vote getters are 3 Democrats and a Republican, or perhaps 4 Republicans, or maybe 2 Republicans and a Libertarian and an unaffiliated. Could be any combination of something depending on where you live. I think the argument that the state parties have made, and I think both major state parties are opposed to this, is that you would then force candidates to be running against somebody in their own party in the general election, which is not how our current system works. And I think the argument is that it would cost a lot more money, and I think it's fair to probably say that, to run in the general election as well, when you're not just heads up with somebody, or if you're in a quote unquote safe district, generally you don't have to spend as much money in a general election. This would require you to do so. And that's the argument for it that Kent Theory has made. He's the major funder behind this. You may know that name. He's from DaVita Dialysis. The group that he is a part of, whose name I'm forgetting. Isn't it
Advancing Colorado?
No, that's Michael Field's group.
Oh, that's Michael Field.
He has a different group. They're the ones that have been behind some of these big electoral changes in Colorado in the last half decade. Our independent redistricting commissions and our semi-open primary system, they're all a result of his group. So a mixed bag, as people are, but I think there are arguments to be made for and against. I'm going to pause there and ask if you have any questions about any of these. Yes.
Yeah, just one comment against this. As a candidate myself, I don't think there's any way that I would have been able to run without party support. Because, you know, the help with fundraising and the ability to find people to support you. I think that ultimately you would find that only very wealthy people will be able to run for these public offices. Because an average person would not be able to put together the amount of money required to get your name out there. Look at how many, I don't know how many ads you see each day for 131. They're all over the TV. I haven't seen one against.
That's what's kind of.
And so that tells you that there's a lot of money behind this.
That's a fair point to raise. And I think it's fair to say that money follows money, generally speaking, if that makes sense. So a serious consideration to make about this one. Any other questions about any of the three that we just talked about? Amendment 80, 130, 131? Yes.
Oh, there for anybody you want.
Yes. Yeah, that's a fair point. That is one big point that the proponents make about ranked choice voting is that the idea is to break the stranglehold of the two major parties on the electoral system and allow minor party candidates or unaffiliated candidates a better shot at being on the ballot in the general election or potentially being more competitive. I think it's a fair point. I mean, it can be the case that you might find that a compelling reason to vote for it. And there might also be other reasons voting against it. Yeah, Morgan.
I was just gonna say, I was talking with some friends about this idea. We were talking about the two-party system, and kind of how I summarized it is that it seems to me like it will change the balance of power and how things are allocated. To me, it seems like an unknown whether it will give more power to lesser known candidates and parties or more power to the people who already have it. So
it's fair.
Just that's one.
Yeah, and I think worth noting too that in Alaska, the example that we talked about, I'll stand in front of the camera. Sorry, Krista, if you can't see me. In Alaska, you made, if you're familiar with what happened in Alaska in their House election, they had a special election and then a general election. And the candidate who won was the Democrat Mary Peltola, who's, I think, the first Alaska Native to be in Congress. She was elected primarily because there were two Republicans on the ballot and a Democrat, and Alaska is a relatively conservative state, often elects Republicans to state office into Congress. And because of the way the ranked choice system tabulated votes, she was the winner of that election. And so people who opposed her election are now the ones primarily driving the repeal of ranked choice voting in Alaska. It's not to say, again, that that's an argument for or against in Colorado, but worth thinking about. You can blame that partially on Sarah Palin too, but yes.
I think it works in nonpartisan races.
Okay.
Most of the places in Colorado that currently have it are local governments.
Okay.
And where the election is nonpartisan. And it's probably a whole lot more appropriate for that level.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So if you couldn't hear, Betty was saying primarily in Colorado now, it's used in local and nonpartisan elections. Any other questions, comments about those three before we move ahead? Seeing none, let's go to Amendment 79, which Joanne was going to ask about earlier or make a comment about. The general gist of this one, you may be familiar with, because I know there are folks in the room who are advocates of Amendment 79, adding language to the state constitution, recognizing an affirmative right to abortion access. It also prevents health insurance plans from prohibiting coverage of abortion procedures. You'll see there on the right-hand side, I tried to put a little bit of the history in there. In 1984, Colorado voters passed an amendment that prohibits, quote, the use of public funds for abortions. And so this measure repeals that section of the Constitution while also adding affirmative rights language to that section. For that reason, it requires 55% of the vote. It's not just a simple majority. Joanne, would you like to say anything?
So my question is there a reason that your group did not have a comment on this. I mean, we've been doing some things at the church and looking at the statement, the statements of, the ELCA.
Yeah.
And we did one on abortion where it was fairly clear from I didn't realize how far back, like the 90s, 91.
Yeah, pretty early in the 90s.
It was, that was a decision that should be made by a woman and a doctor. So my question is, why are we standing?
That's a great question. Why are we neutral on this one? So it's not that we don't have a comment on it, but it's that we're neutral on the actual measure. I think the distinction is that if there were a measure on the ballot that would forbid access to abortion, we would pretty clearly oppose that, because we have language in the social statement that says we forbid something that would prevent access to the procedure entirely, which is not what this does. Creating affirmative language in the state constitution for something that is already statutorily legal in Colorado is more of a semantic distinction on our side of things than it is. It's not creating a new legal regime, because abortion is already legal in Colorado. Creating an affirmative right in the Constitution, we don't have an opinion about whether that's the right way to secure those rights. Like, it can be secured statutorily or constitutionally. The proponents of this feel, because of Dobbs v. Jackson, is that right? Jackson County, that they want to put that language in the Constitution and not just have it on the state statutes. So that is why we do not have an opinion. I mean, neutral, I should say.
Individuals need to have the right to make a decision, not the government. And I
Certainly.
think we have seen what's happened to some women in this country who have died. Because abortion is not, sometimes it's a health issue.
Oh, I mean, you're speaking to
I'm
the
saying that.
Yeah, that's fair.
I just find it interesting when we did this, that we strongly supported remove the ban on sex, which I totally get, but it just seems like at the role that our country's going, again, looking at what happens at the Supreme Court has impacted people here. So I'm just surprised that we chose the same neutral.
It's a fair question, but like I say, it's really about procedure for us. If there was something on the ballot to ban it, we would oppose that strongly. But because the statute already makes it legal in Colorado, this is just adding a level to what the legal regime already is in Colorado. And if the voters decide that that's how they want to secure those rights, they're free to do so. But it's kind of a weird distinction. But I did read our abortion statement very closely to see if we could, just to see how the language matches up with what's in the language here. And in our opinion, we wanted to remain neutral. Yeah, Pastor Kent.
Is it clear to people this isn't just you personally making this decision?
Yeah, yes. Well, I will clarify, and I know that's not what Joanne is asking either, but I should be clear that our decisions are made by our policy committee, which is composed of clergy and lay people from across the state. Just for those of you who might not be familiar, and that is the group that considers all of these in balance with our social statements to decide what positions we take. Yeah. Yes, Betty.
Just one comment. Basically, the reason that it's there is that Colorado has had, from the perspective of someone in favor of reproductive rights, Colorado statutes have been very good. Colorado voters have consistently been supportive of reproductive rights. And because, the reason for trying to put it in the Constitution is that it becomes harder to change. A legislature can change a statute overnight, but not a constitutional.
That's a good reminder. It is a lot harder to change language that's in the Constitution. Yes.
Not be the second half of that prevents health insurance plans from prohibiting. Do you know if that's based on who's funding it? So full insurance versus ASO or ASO this stuff?
My understanding is that for state-funded health insurance plans, yes, but that's a good question.
Because no public funds. It goes back
Right,
to
it's
that
because of this Amendment 3 language, which is still in the Constitution. So that would remove that prohibition. Seeing no other questions for the moment, let's jump to, I'm going to very quickly just go through the rest of the things in here. And some of them are very arcane and dry, and we don't need to spend any time on them, but I just want to I want to kind of get through the last bits and then we'll kind of open it up for any questions or discussion about all of them. And then maybe at the end, Katie will have a few Denver specific ones to talk about since I know a lot of you are Denver voters. Sounds good? Great. Let's briefly go through at the very top. Prop 127 is about big cat hunting. The proponents of this measure, I think the committee is called Cats Aren't Trophies. It's an animal rights group, an animal welfare group, wants to ban the hunting of bobcat, lynx, and mountain lion in Colorado. Lynx hunting is already illegal because they're a protected species, but bobcat and mountain lions, there's currently a regime under the state Parks and Wildlife for how many can be hunted in certain areas. This would forbid that from taking place with certain exceptions about protecting human life and property. Prop 129.
Yeah.
Cre-
And what,
I'm
27,
sorry.
really quick.
Well, yeah, we'll get back to that. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, 127 on that one. It really is trying to get at the trophy hunters. It's not the sport hunting. It's the people that go out with the expeditions and shine lights and tree the cats and then shoot them. It's really not sport and it doesn't protect life. So,
Yeah, that's fair. And we'll, like I say, at the end, any comments you want to make on any of these, please feel free.
Yeah.
Prop 129 creates a new professional category in Colorado called Veterinary Professional Associates. I think I'm getting that correct. Purportedly addressing a shortage of veterinarians in Colorado and wanting to create a more accessible category that would allow some kinds of treatment to be supervised by a veterinarian, but that could be done by a VPA.
and vet school has already established the program. That's a master's level program that these people would have to graduate from. So, and it really is, like you said, addressing veterinary shortages in rural communities that pets could get routine care.
Yes, and
I've seen that in the medical profession.
Right.
You have
So-
MPs, you have PAs,
Right.
and it allows them to see more people. And they still go to school, they're still supervised, and they still have to be approved, and
Sometimes.
they're still being evaluated,
sure.
but it allows more healthcare to more people.
Let's go to Prop KK. This would create a new excise tax on the sale of firearms and ammunition. The revenue from that, it's modeled on a bill from California last year, would go to the Colorado Crime Victim Services Fund. They're estimating about $30 million, adding this 6.5% excise tax. Amendment G expands our state property tax exemption to disabled veterans that have something called unemployability status with the VA. It would benefit vets who are in that category, but of course, it only benefits you if you already own a home. And then the last two, Amendment H and K, they're very, very dry. Amendment H, well, maybe Amendment H isn't as dry as I say it is, but the argument here is that judges are the ones in charge of policing themselves in Colorado, and it would create a new independent commission to evaluate judicial performance and discipline cases. The argument being that right now judges judge judges, I guess. So it creates a new commission for that. And then Amendment K is modifying some of our ballot measure filing deadlines. It's rather minor.
By 1 week.
By 1 week, yes, which we gotta vote on that to put it in the Constitution. So those are the last few. I think we've been through all 14 of the things on the ballot. So take a breath because it's a lot of things to decide on. That is why your blue book is so robust this year. I want to pause before we move ahead to anything Denver specific and ask, are there any outstanding questions, comments, opinions, thoughts, ideas, beliefs, dreams about any of these?
I'm wondering if there should be a limit to how many of these can be on one.
Well, ironically, to do that, you'd probably have to put it on the ballot. Yes.
I'm not sure we're gonna get.
Well, you bring up a good point, and I think that's part of why I think on one of these flaps of the brochure, I wrote something about encouraging voters to look at your ballot measures first, like vote on those while you have the excitement and energy of looking at the ballot, and you're thinking about it and doing that first, because you might already have some idea how you're going to vote on some of the partisan races. But I think for a lot of voters, they get these, and even though they send the blue book out, even though there are ads for these things, they always come as a surprise to most people. They're like, what, we're voting on abortion and same-sex marriage and lynx hunting, apparently. It's a surprise to discover all these things, and it's a lot to take in. So
Advantage to us.
it is, very much so.
In-person voting and you got.
Oh, imagine standing there and having to decide all of these. Yes, we have the benefit of an all mail-in ballot.
Take home test.
That's right. A take-home test. See, the star student over here, for bringing her materials, a take-home test. I only tease Joanne about that because that's how I was too. But yes, you have like 3 weeks to decide on your ballot. So you've got a lot of time to sit and think and consider. That said, it is a lot of stuff, and it's not just the statewide stuff, counties, municipalities, all that stuff. Any other thoughts, comments about that before we go to Denver specific?
No, you're right.
Yeah.
about it. This is a bit of a rarity. This
Mm.
lived in what, 4 states? This is the first state that I've lived in that has this kind of citizen initiative
Hmm.
process.
Yeah.
So a lot of states just don't even have it. You know, it's a whole education in itself.
It is. Yeah, it is very much an education. I think that's a good way to put it. There are some who say, well, asking the voters to make all these decisions, is that a good idea? Well, it forces you to be, I think, more well-informed than you might be otherwise about some of the statutory changes going on, some of the groups trying to make big changes in the state. For better or worse, this is the system we have, and we have access to direct public policy making as voters in a way that some people in other states do not. I'm going to hand it over to Katie, and then at the end, we can wrap up if there's any other comments or questions.
So also, Peter, thank you for clarifying that your recommendations came out of your policy council. The ones on the Together Colorado, we have what's called the core executive leadership, and it's quite a robust group, and that's where those recommendations came out of. Likewise, of the 3 from Denver that Together Colorado has taken position of, came out of a subgroup of Denver, of Together Colorado, called the Denver Organizing Chapter. And Betty is now in the Jeffco. We have chapters in Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Denver, Jeffco, and Larimer counties. So we're and Boulder, there's Boulder County. So we're pretty robust that we can then address those. So real quick on there, we're asking for yes votes on Denver Health. It is a tax, and it does go to Denver Health. Right now, they're woefully underfunded. It is the safety net hospital. One of the arguments against voting yes on it is this really should go out to all of the counties on the Front Range, because they take patients from all counties, not just Denver, but Denver has to carry the money on it. And just if the literature, we've been working with Denver Health on this, is to combat the narrative that's out there. In 2023, I guess, Denver Health, 2% of the patients were immigrants. So these are Americans that they're seeing. So yeah. This is 2Q for Denver. 2Q, okay. The other one is 2R, which is a tax for affordable housing. And we call these regressive taxes because you're already taxed it. The good thing about the affordable housing is it will be exempting food and necessary items, but the money will go to a fund to build to start address affordable housing. Working with COFA, which is Colorado Coalition for Affordable Housing, they recognize this is far from perfect. But we also recognize this is one small first step. And there will be a commission set up under Councilwoman Parody and Councilwoman Gonzalez Gutierrez, and they will be addressing the AMI's adjusted median income to see who qualifies for it. So until it passes, they're not going to try to set this up. So we understand that's a regressive tax on that. Together Colorado, we do a lot with the labor unions, but we are saying vote yes for the collective bargaining for city employees and firefighters. And that's 2U and 2V. So those are the Denver specific ones. I know we did not have any from our transforming justice team on there, but 2T is removing the citizenship requirement to allow for police officers, and you were talking about we're having a hard time recruiting. So by removing the citizenship requirement, it will also allow for a greater diversification of the police force, to have a police force that looks more like the city of Denver. So those are the ones that we're supporting. Any questions on?
They don't, they didn't live in law and want to know.
Pardon?
They live in the law.
Right. So I mean, it's pretty good too. So both of those. So if you have any questions on those, and then the League of Women Voters has one L2 on that. So Betty, did you want to cover the Jeffco one real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a measure in Jeffco that
This
Betty
is
can speak to. Oh. And then we'll wrap up after this.
okay. Oh, and I'll send these around real quick. They're just, if you can give me your name and your email and phone number on there, I might do some follow-up with you. This will come together, Colorado, and you might get the thing in the mail just to say thank you for coming and remind you to vote. So I'll send these around to you. Fill those out. And I'll send them to the back.
On Friday, the leadership in Jeffco did take a position on Jeffco 1A. It is what we've known as debrucing. But as a result of the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, which we passed way too many years ago, there's a limitation on how much of the money, the tax money that you collect, that you're able to spend. Your budget can grow and your income can grow by a certain percentage, regardless, but it doesn't necessarily match up with the economic growth. And in Jeffco, Jeffco is one of 2 counties in this whole state that has not debruced. If you're new to the area, it's called debrucing because the father of the Tabor Amendment, the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, was Douglas Bruce. So if you hear that term, that's what it's about. But because of the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, your growth in tax revenue is controlled artificially, not just based on inflation. So in Jeffco, what has happened is that over the years, the economy has grown and the Tabor limit has grown some, but the economy has grown faster and the Tabor limit plods along. Well, then came COVID and everything crashed. And now the economy is going like crazy back up, but Jeffco is that the tax limitation is limited. So there is a huge hole in the expenditures and what Jefferson County is allowed to spend. So they are asking the voters for permission to spend all of the tax money that comes in. Historically, voters have probably gotten an average of $20 back a year. And one of the insidious issues with the way the Jeffco issue is built is that they are prohibited from applying for grants, local government grants, state grants. The federal grants don't count against their Tabor limit, but the state grants do. And that if they apply for the state grants, it essentially pushes everything up in the bucket, and they end up having to give back a whole lot more. So they essentially have to give back most of what they get in grants. And for Jeffco, we had 3 or 4 fires this fall. One thing that the state provided $1 million grants for counties for fire mitigation. Jeffco couldn't apply because of the Tabor limitation. The same is true of other human services and health kinds of grants that the state provides. Jeffco can't apply. So this is designated specifically for transportation and infrastructure, roads, bridges, and public safety. And especially with one of the spokespeople for this is the sheriff. And she outlined what of her responsibilities are absolutely required.
Hmm.
And there are so many more of her responsibilities, including being the fire marshal for Jefferson County, that are optional. And essentially, she said, what's going to happen is I'm going to have to stop doing the optional things like mental health counseling, training for officers. Together, Colorado has been trying to get her to add a particular training for officers in the way they interact with the public, a more humane interaction with people who are incarcerated in the jail, or just deal with people on the street. And that's something that they certainly feel to do because they don't have the funds. So essentially, we have taken a yes position on Jeffco 1A. And I think there aren't that many of us here who live in Jeffco.
There's a few.
Arapahoe County is.
Okay, I couldn't remember what the other one was. Thank you, Betty.
Yeah.
So I want to say just two quick things by way of concluding, because I know we're slightly over our time, but I appreciate you all coming today. The two things I want to say are the big push from our church body, the ELCA this fall, is civic participation. That's just turning out to vote and participating in voting and encouraging other people to vote as well. So I hope you will be encouraged yourself to vote. I think if you came to this, you're probably going to be voting, but encourage the people around you to vote as well, to pay attention to these ballot measures as well, and not just the partisan races. I know it's a presidential election year and that, sucks up all the oxygen in the room, but these are also very important for us. So participating in our voting is really important. ELCA has resources on that at elca.org/vote. The second thing I want to say is that I know our presiding bishop, Elizabeth Eaton, she'll be releasing a video about voting specifically, but she has also been part of leading a conversation with other judicatory leaders at the national level in the United States around Christian nationalism and what it is and why it is an insidious distortion of our Christian faith. And I hope that you will also take the time to look at what she has said about that and what our bishops have said as well about Christian nationalism. As I say, I think a highly distorted picture of what the Christian faith is in public life and assumptions that we do not share about how that faith should interact with the structures of our government. So I hope you'll be encouraged to look at both of those things. And thanks again for all of your participation in this, because I know it's a lot, but I really value the chance to have the conversation with you. So thanks for coming. Yes.
I just want to echo thanks to Peter for coming. And I was gonna, if it's okay, I want to give a plug. Look for
Sure.
January, Lutheran Day at the Capitol.
Oh, March.
March. Oh, we're slipping. March is Lutheran Day at the Capitol. It is great education. Peter does a great job. We've had the bishop come and speak before, so look for that on your email. The other thing I wanted to remind you of for Denver people, for Together Colorado, that on this coming Saturday in the afternoon, we're meeting at Montview Presbyterian to actually do a Get Out the Vote campaign. And we're going to have flyers on the positions of the Together Colorado and other ballot organizations that match with our faith values. So if you fill out those cards and have your email, I'll forward you the email on that if you want to help to get out there and vote. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. My charge to all of you, now that you've been educated, go educate 5 of your friends.
There you go. There you go. Great. Thanks, Katie. Thank you. Take care.
Yeah.